We have a quorum. We've reached the appointed hour. The meeting is now called to order. May I thank the government officials for attending today's meeting. Well, let me let me introduce them. They are Ms. Jenny Chan, Principal Assistant Secretary of Transport and Housing, Ms. Joyce Chan, Assistant Secretary for Transport and Housing, Mr. Marine, Mr. Lai Ying-kang, Marine Department Chief Marine Policy, Mr. Chang Lok Tak, General Manager Services, Mr. Fong Chung Yi, Senior Surveyor of Ships, Marine Policy, Mr. Patrick Lee, Principal Assistant Secretary, Principal Environmental Protection Officer. Let us also invite the groups into the deputations into the room. There are 3 representatives. And they are, you may speak, the representative, you may speak in respect of the regulation. There is simultaneous interpretation. Channel 0 is floor, 1 is Cantonese, 2 is English, 3 is Putonghua. Apart from government officials and legislative members, anyone who speak here will not be protected by the Legislative Council Powers and Privileges Ordinance.
Welcome the presence of members of NGO that include Mrs. Jo Wilson of Living Llama and Ms. Louise Preston of Living Islands Movement. And you could choose simultaneous interpretation with the earpiece and turn to channel 2 for interpretation from the Cantonese to English. And please be reminded that with the exception of the legislative councillor and the government officials, representative of the NGO would not be protected by the power and privilege, the ordinance. So having said that, without any further ado, let's begin the discussion of today. And since there is not many representatives, so I tend to be very relaxed with the time allowed for each representative. So let's start with the 8 minutes each, and normally we have only 3 minutes each. So let's start with 8 minutes each, and then after that we could take further questions from the legislative councillor, and maybe a dialogue between members of the NGO and the officials. Okay? 咁我就返返去。
All right, let me switch into Cantonese again. If I may now invite members to see if they would like to comment on the arrangements for today. If not, then I'll allow the deputations to speak. First, Mr. Patrick Young of the WWF. Yes, thank you, Chairman. The WWF is very concerned about marine refuse in Hong Kong. Our marine waters and our coastal areas have accumulated a lot of refuse. We welcome the government for setting out a new regulation to replace the old merchant shipping prevention pollution by garbage regulation. We are concerned about law enforcement and the strength of law enforcement and whether they are adequate to implement the law and deter the discharge of refuse at sea. I want to share with you some cases to reflect the current situation of marine refuse, and I try to describe to you the current law enforcement situation and will make some recommendations. The first case is in respect of Aberdeen typhoon shelter. We conducted a survey. We discovered a lot of domestic refuse such as plastic bottles, cutlery, food packaging and fast food containers floating in the water. According to the local people, some fishermen are disposing of marine refuse inappropriately. Another serious problem is the polystyrene boxes, which are used to contain fish. it's obvious that these boxes floating in the waters came from the fish market and the fishing vessels. The Marine Department said that day after day they have scavenging boats to clear the refuse. We're doubtful that the enforcement efforts are adequate. According to the reply by the Marine Department given to Mr. Albert Chan, they conducted a survey in Lap Sap Wan. They said there were no floating refuse. There were not too many not too much floating refuse, but according to an EPD report, it was pointed out that current and wind directions affected the distribution of marine refuse. Just a short survey would not be able to reflect the actual situation. Now, there is a study on source and fate of marine refuse in Hong Kong. The categorization is not able to distinguish the source of refuse, whether the refuse came from land or from sea. They claim that 80% of marine refuse originated from land-based sources. That can only be a reference. In Lap Sap Wan, we've found a lot of floating floats and also nets. They are related to marine activities. They are related to the dumping caused by ships and boats. There's a need to conduct more detailed surveys and monitoring to discover the sources of refuse in respect of Lap Sap Wan. As for causes of floating refuse, they are dumped by vessels. We have received reports that different people, those from yachts and fishing boats, dispose of garbage at sea in the late evening when nobody sees them. And even yellow garbage bags distributed by the Marine Department to vessels were found along the shore. This shows that vessels are disposing of refuse directly into the sea. There are also marine or fishing-related activities which cause refuse, and they are causing serious impacts on marine ecology and marine safety. It is worth paying attention. Say, for example, the nets dumped, the trawling nets dumped, and also there are other things, fishing gear dumped, and they affect marine ecology. And there is also the issue of law enforcement. We appreciate the efforts of Marine Department taking the message to different groups to promote harbor, cleaning up the harbor and dealing with refuse. After so many years, floating refuse have not been reduced substantially. If you may refer to our figure 2, which is the collection of refuse since 1997. From 2003 until now, the refuse collected is about 1,100 to 1,200 tons. The situation has not improved over a decade. In figure 2, you can see, in figure 3 rather, you can see the number of convictions declines from 131 in 1999 to 11 cases in 2014. We are suspicious the amount of marine refuse has been maintained on a high level, and yet the number of convictions has declined so substantially. We are concerned that whether there is a decline in law enforcement action. As for the collection of refuse, domestic refuse by the Marine Department from 2006 to 2014, the amount of refuse collected is about 4,000 to 4,500 tons. There is no greater effort in collecting marine refuse. If there is greater effort to collect domestic refuse from the boats, we expect that there will be a significant decline in marine refuse disposed at sea by the fishermen. We also, and all in all, the WWF would like to make the following request. The department should enhance their efforts in handling marine refuse. There is a need to deter illegal disposal activities. Marine Department and other law enforcement agencies should identify black spots and increase enforcement efforts against those who make our shorelines filthy. As for marine fishery-related marine refuse such as ghost nets, there has been no systematic assessment of the situation. We hope that the Marine Department will monitor different types of fishing or fishery-related refuse and clean up and take cleanup action more often. There is a need to reduce the amount of litter disposed at sea. The Marine Department should re-examine its efforts and scale in collecting domestic refuse from vessels, and also consider the most cost-effective way of removing floating refuse. The Marine Department should assess its effectiveness in getting its message across in respect of keeping the ocean clean or just keeping the sea clean. The situation is still serious. I hope that further improvement can be made. Can you inform the government departments in respect of the black spots? The WWF is conducting a survey. We are collecting data, but we do not have any specific proposal in respect of black spots. In Aberdeen, in Cheungchao, in Tai O, we will conduct some surveys. I hope the department will pay attention to that.
Of living llama, please.
No?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Good afternoon. Living Llama has been cleaning beaches for 6 years, and so we are intimately acquainted with the garbage that washes up on our shores. We not only collect the trash, but we sort it, we count it, and we observe what likely human activity has caused it, and also how the marine life is feeding on it. The amount of trash is overwhelming, and refuse from shipping is no doubt a major contributor. We made one beach on the north side of Llama the focus of a year-long study. As well as general litter, refuse specific to shipping activities include oil cans, pumps, oily rags, fishing floats, polystyrene boxes, netting, fishing line, clothing, toothbrushes, lighters, and any other unwanted item, including, I'm sorry to say, the yellow plastic bags issued by the Marine Department full of trash. We receive daily news stories from various other groups around the world that are investigating and trying to do something about the global disaster that is plastic in our oceans. It's not a question of just identifying black spots. This is everywhere now in the world. We believe that in Hong Kong, as in elsewhere, much of the problem is caused by habit, coupled with a lack of basic environmental literacy and a lack of services to enable people to act easily and be responsible with the waste they produce. Last year, for the Hong Kong cleanup, we cleaned the beach in Yangshuan every day for 42 days. We took off around 5 tons of construction waste, and as we sorted through layer upon layer of historical dumping, it became clear to us that it was normal practice to throw unwanted items into the sea. This begs the question, if the public see government departments allowing our natural landscape to become, and then remain, blighted, how can we expect ordinary people to behave any differently? We have urged the Secretary for Environmental Protection to declare the trash in our ocean as a disaster. After all, if the plastic was in its pre-processed form, oil, it would be considered so. Declaring a disaster would show leadership and focus people's minds on the seriousness of the problem. It is very disappointing to find that the government's recent study concludes that marine refuse does not constitute a serious problem in Hong Kong. This directly contradicts the findings of a 1997 survey by the Hong Kong Marine Conservation Society, funded by the ECF, which found that marine debris posed a serious pollution threat to Hong Kong's marine environment. For our group and other organisations that have spent years working on the problem, marine trash is very serious indeed. Devastating would be a more accurate description. If the panel is in any doubt, please arrange a site visit to Lapsat Wan with the Coastal Watch members. There is nothing like the experience of standing on a mountain of trash on a beach to focus people on the urgency of this problem, except perhaps actually trying to clean it up again and again, sorting it, counting it, recording it, only to see it coming back in alarming quantities. And we do this experience with our children, and the children see it also. In the Lapsat Wan case, the majority of the trash appears to have come from shipping. As well as tightening legislation, resources will need to be deployed to enforce the law, to educate and communicate creatively and effectively so that people are inspired to change their habits. This is not about blaming or buck passing, but about raising standards and setting good examples. We hope the government can respond positively to this challenge. Now, I was thinking that I had 3 minutes, and if I can see the clock, I spoke slowly, but I do want to just add that a simple Google search online, if you look for ocean, marine trash, plastic in the ocean, you'll find newspaper headlines from around the world reporting on how 8 million tons of plastic are dumped in the ocean every year. Of course, it's impossible to really count it, but this problem is not just about Hong Kong. Everywhere, from the Arctic down to Australia, from the west coast of America across to Asia, we just have not kept up with the amount of trash we're producing and the ways in which we can process this trash at the other end. On the cigarette front, the government's report says that cigarettes are not a serious problem, or trash from cigarettes is not a serious problem. We found this when we first started cleaning beaches. You tend to pick up the big stuff, the stuff that's easy to pick up. But actually what we've learned from cleaning beaches that look clean is that it's the microplastics, the tiny bits of plastics that are on the seashore. When we cleaned the beach in Yangshuan every day for 42 days, we picked up almost 3,000 cigarette butts. That's 23,000 cigarette butts in 1 year, if you multiply it out, just from one small beach. And we see people habitually just dropping the cigarette butts on the floor, and they're getting into the storm drains and going out to sea. People don't think twice about it. The estimation of cigarette butts littered worldwide every year is 4.5 trillion. And these are toxic, they contain plastics, and this is getting into the food chain. We now have pictures, documentaries that are now looking at plankton and are seeing the plastic, they're going into the plankton. We have fish that are having plastics taken out of their bellies, and bird life that are dying because they have a belly full of plastic. In fact, a few weeks ago, I held a bag of plastic that had come out of a young albatross. And if you are in any doubt whatsoever of the seriousness of this problem, I invite you to please come take a look, or just, find those sources, find those experts that have this material, and it will certainly open your eyes. So that's all I've got to say. I do have files. This is a very strange environment to talk about beaches, as we're nowhere near a beach, but I have files, I've got pictures, we've documented everything. If anyone wants further information, I'm very happy to share it. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next speaker will be Ms. Louise Preston from the Living Islands Movement, please.
Living Islands Movement welcomes this subcommittee's initiative in seeking an active and vigilant approach to preventing and reducing the accumulation of marine refuse on Hong Kong's beaches. The measures currently in place, such as the refuse collection service for vessels at anchorage and typhoon shelters, marine scavenging, and the current publicity and education measures, don't seem to be adequate. The refuge accumulation on our beaches is part of the much wider waste management crisis facing Hong Kong, which needs to be addressed at source through radical waste separation, reduction, and recycling measures. The Marine Department's primary interest in marine littering seems to be to ensure safe navigation for vessels in Hong Kong waters. However, protecting and preserving our beaches is a much wider issue, and one of the challenges is the number of different government departments that play a role in tackling the problem, including EPD, FEHD, LCSD, and Lands Department, and several others. A more holistic approach is required, rather than allocating responsibility for different parts of the shoreline to different departments, depending on whether it is above or below the high tide line and whether the refuse is found in the water or on the land. It doesn't help to tackle or solve the problem to be more concerned about different labels and classifications, such as whether it's land waste derived or marine derived, rather than dealing with the rubbish itself. The establishment of the government's interdepartmental working group on clean shorelines was a welcome step in the right direction, but perhaps this group needs to be given wider-ranging responsibilities and accountabilities. For example, implementing the coastal protection zone and systematic cleaning of non-gazetted beaches. At present, the reports and studies commissioned by the government, such as the recent one issued by Mott MacDonald, tell a very different story from what we are seeing on our local beaches with our own eyes. So there is a gap between the government's perception of the problem and the reality that those of us who live near beaches see every day. While the current situation of overlapping department responsibilities isn't addressing the problem, any truly determined effort to solve marine pollution in Hong Kong's water and beaches also requires close cooperation with Macau, SAR and the People's Republic of China in looking at the overall sources of pollution in the Pearl River Delta as a single entity.
Thank you.
Well, officials, do you have any responses? If not, they'll ask members to ask questions. Albert Chen first. Well, I think there's only me asking questions now. We'll have more than an hour to ask questions. Chairman, I hope that the guests present can say more, because when we scrutinize the legislation, particularly when talking about the marine refuse, it often happened that the Marine Department told us that a lot of the issues related to marine refuse lie outside of their responsibilities, because some floating refuse actually lie out beyond the scope of their work. So it's not their responsibility. They would handle marine fuels in some instances only. My experience, however, showed me that I had several experiences of cleaning up beaches. I found that often the marine refuse apparently came from ships. Well, you can tell by the variety of refuse. I told you, I even found condoms, needles, among the refuse. Every time there were new needles, on beaches, I often found them. So I really doubt that maybe the sea crew members, tourists or sea crew members, sailors, or even people on board of yachts have the habit of taking in drugs. So therefore, once they have had injections, they threw away the needles. So therefore, and they contributed to the floating marine refuse. You can see in a common sea route where there are vessels passing through from day to night, and the ships sail past so fast. So on a daily basis, a lot of refuse were accumulated, particularly for refuse that happened or that were seen outside South Lantau. Apparently, they came from boats. And many organizations and the EPD, had received a lot of complaints, but they only cleaned up the refuse after receiving complaints. That's it. And last time I also said that the variety of methods in scavenging refuse are not very modern. So the methods used do not match up to the level expected in a place, like Hong Kong. So I think the guests today, the deputations today, could tell us, what they think of the sources of refuse that are found in Hong Kong, and what sort of improvements they think the government can make. What can the government do? Okay, well.
The representative wanted
well,
to
you
from the
heard my question. Mainly that. Okay, good. Yeah.
Maybe I can start.
Yes.
Well, We've, as a local group, we have put in 100 reports to government on the subject of waste and development, focusing on Llama Island. And so we've looked at how people behave both on land and on the shoreline with regard to waste. One of the difficulties that we are facing is that there is a probably historical view of LAPSAP, which comes from many, many years ago when there wasn't quite so much LAPSAP in the world and things were much simpler, so that you know, you just have a bin and people would put the waste in the bin. It's the same everywhere else in the world. Now what we find is when we have a problem with rubbish, littering, dumping, it is very difficult as a member of the public to fix this problem so that our school children, our kids, do not see the grown-ups just throwing litter everywhere or just leaving litter everywhere, because once litter is left in our community, that becomes the normal standard. And the difficulty is this, that rubbish is not rubbish as far as policy is concerned. It depends on what kind of rubbish it is and where it lies, who deals with it. If it is on the path or near the bins, FEHD will pick it up. And in fact, FEHD being operational and hands-on, they have been absolutely outstanding in supporting us on cleaning up our beaches. When we first started and we showed them a picture of the beach on the north side of Llama, the local officer said, "Oh, Mrs. Wilson, who put that there? It's terrible. Who's dumped that on the beach?" And when I said it came from the sea, he looked at me in disbelief and said, "No way." But actually, then he came and he learnt with us, because cleaning a beach is a learning experience, and we have found that there is no jurisdictional divide for rubbish. It does not stay in one place. We also find it can get cleaned up easily if, for example, Drainage Services has a work site, and the work sites used to look like rubbish tips. You could not tell the difference until we engaged with Drainage Services, and they responded very positively. And then they will keep their work site clean and tidy. But not all government departments behave like that. Some water services, district office, their contractors will come and will habitually throw their rubbish. Even before we started our year-long study of the North Beach on Llama, and we actually called this study Brand on the Beach because we counted the plastic water bottles on the beach after going one time and picking up 900 plastic water bottles from one small beach. We decided to count them for a year and name the brands. And we guessed correctly, that the #1 brand on the beach would be the same brand that we saw government contractors getting, because what we saw was that they would take 1 or 2 sips from the bottle of water and then throw it into the underground growth or leave it behind. This comes from a culture where people think it's somebody else's responsibility to pick up after them, and this is the thing that we really have to address. You know, I'm trying to do it with my children. There's a lot of other people that are trying to do it in the schools, but so many people have helpers. So many people do not even see the rubbish that comes into their house, and it miraculously goes away, or they put it on the ground and FEHD will come and clean it up. We see in the community, we've tried to engage with the police to enforce the law on littering, and all we got was to be passed from one department to another, and it just goes round and around. So this makes it very, very difficult to tackle the problem at source, because there's no one authority that is saying, you know what, we've got to change our habits, because we really have to change the way that we accept LAPSAP into our lives, and then we process it. And if it's something that we cannot process and is ending up in the sea, like, for instance, polystyrene, perhaps we should think of other ways of getting the things that we want without producing so much rubbish. It is very problematic, particularly with government departments that are not operational and in the community, because with the best will in the world, if you're sitting at an office far away and you've got so many different things coming into your desk, it is very, very difficult to connect with actually what's on the ground. And in fact, the first time we reported the bags full of trash, the Marine Department bags full of trash to the Marine Department, their response was, no way, we spend our time cleaning up rubbish. And I know that they do. They spend a lot of time, and they were absolutely horrified and couldn't believe that they were ending up on our beach, but they are. And it's only through the efforts of local green groups, and a lot of the school children are going out now and cleaning up, that these things are coming to people's into people's vision. But the idea that it's the jurisdiction stops and the rubbish will stop is just not happening. It's not working.
好，有冇其他代表？係。
Who would like to speak? The WWF has discovered that the Marine Department and other law enforcement departments have not been very active in prosecuting those who dump at sea. We cannot say directly that you have reduced your effort in enforcing the law, but we have seen a decline in prosecutions. Can you explain why there's a decline? Or do they just dump the refuse secretly and therefore you are not able to catch them? Or when you're doing your patrolling, your attention is not paid to dumping refuse at sea? We can see that in Aberdeen, there is law enforcement by the department, but the situation is not improved. Every day, we pick up a lot of marine refuse in Aberdeen. This typhoon shelter is just a small place, and if there is no effective law enforcement, then how can you enforce the law in southern Lantau waters? Now, you should start at the most serious place in respect of law enforcement. Education and publicity are also important. Now, if you want to enforce the law, you may have an unlimited number of boats to hand out your prosecution tickets against unlimited number of vessels. But if we can step up education and publicity, if we can change habits, that will help to reduce marine refuse. The Marine Department can also work with NGOs, fishermen organizations, and even companies to look at or to review the publicity arrangements and see what improvements can be made. Concerning inspecting the black spots of marine refuse, according to a report of the EPD last month, after typhoons, the Marine Department steps up inspection of black spots in remote bays and beaches. This is, of course, a good move. Other than the typhoon season, when there are monsoons, during the monsoon season, there is also a serious problem of refuse being carried to the shore. Would the government department consider making use of vessels of other government departments, say, for example, the Marine Police and also the other government departments who have vessels to monitor the situation and identify places along the shoreline where there is accumulation of refuse, instead of just waiting for inspection after the typhoon. As for refuse in the seabed, the survey was on floating refuse and refuse along the shoreline. Yet, a lot of refuse is lying in the seabed. Say, for example, the trawl nets, the fishing gears, even domestic refuse, air conditioners, electric fans, we discover them on the seabed. The AFCD and also the Marine Department should investigate the situation of refuse on the seabeds and identify the distribution and also survey the impacts on our marine ecology. They shouldn't just focus their attention on coral zones. I hope that can help to deal with the problem.
Anything to add to the response to the Honourable Albert Chan?
Like Patrick and Joe, our anecdotal evidence is also that the majority of the waste that we find on the beaches and shoreline is marine-based. I think it's really not very helpful to use these specific categories. It's rubbish on the beach. Yes, of course we need to understand where it comes from. But one of the difficulties, as I said earlier, is the delineation of responsibility between the government departments for where the rubbish is actually found. And even if it's been in the water at one time, inevitably it ends up on the shoreline in mangrove swamps or on our wetlands, and then it's not the responsibility of the Marine Department. And I think that this labelling is really not at all helpful. Certainly some of the beaches on South Lantau that have the worst rubbish problem, for example, Shoi Hawan, which is predominantly mangrove, an area of immense interest from a zoological point of view because there are, I think, 3 endangered species on that bay, and also Lokiwan. The rubbish there is, without a doubt, marine refuse, but it's on the shoreline. And I think this labelling is one of the problems that is seeing this problem growing and not being tackled in an appropriate manner.
官員有冇回應啊？呢一刻
Do the government officials have anything to respond? Well, let me respond to the points made by the speakers. We like to thank the green groups for providing us with information on refuse along the coastline. Now, let's say that some refuse collection bags distributed by the Marine Department were found on beaches. I like to thank Mrs. Wilson. In fact, she sent me several emails reminding us of this. And indeed, we are very concerned about it. These refuse bags, there were 3. One was wrapping a life jacket, and the other was used to wrap some parts and also some receipts. In another bag, there was some lubricants and some cloths containing lubricants. We thank Mrs. Jo Wilson for providing us information. We will target at the shipyards. These are not domestic refuse. I think the refuse came from the shipyards. At the end of the day, it comes into the sea, into the waters, and then it comes onto the beach, and we have to deal with it. As for law enforcement, in recent years, the number of successful convictions has declined significantly. Our law enforcement action, the number of law enforcement action has increased substantially. Aberdeen Typhoon Shelter is a black spot, definitely. In particular, there is a fish market. In the past, maybe every month, we work with the staff members of the fish market to do publicity. And before that publicity, we try to watch out. We try to keep watch and try to catch the breaches, the offenders, and we did issue prosecution tickets. We've worked quite a lot on the typhoon shelter in Aberdeen. I really want to know why there is a decline in successful convictions. As for enforcement by the Marine Department, the cases are related to smoking. And since the smoking ban, there is a decline in smoking. quite a substantial number of cases were related to dropping cigarette butts into the sea. And the number of such prosecutions declined because less and less people did this. Well, is it because people have become smarter when they dump the refuse? I think we need to work harder in enforcing the law. As for discharge of dropping of refuse from vessels, we have received reports. It's hard to give evidence because you don't know the number of the vessel, you don't know the name of the vessel, and we are not able to identify the vessel to proceed with prosecution. We will publish templates to help members of the public to identify the registration numbers of the vessels. They can remember the registration number of the vessels or the name of the vessels so that information can be given to us for law enforcement. As for stepping up patrolling, now stepping up patrolling after typhoon. Now after typhoon, there is accumulation refuse. Now, after typhoon, people say typhoon is over after typhoon signal number 8 is removed. Now, the typhoon signal number 3 may remain for a very long period of time, and we cannot send our vessels out. In the past, we only wait for typhoon signal number 1 or the removal of all typhoon signals before we send our vessels. By then, there were a lot of complaints from the public. Now, under such circumstances, we send our staff members out, not on boats, but by car to patrol the shore. And after the typhoon signal is removed, then we can send our refuse collection vessels to collect the refuse. Say, during high season of pleasure, the high season of activities of yachts, we will deploy our staff more often to the bays and beaches where there are many yachts. With more yachts, there may be more refuse. We will try to enhance our deployment in these areas. The situation in Aberdeen typhoon shelter is specifically serious in respect of the polystyrene boxes. It's not that people deliberately throw them into the sea. It's about the way how they put the boxes. Now they pile up the boxes on board or along the shore, and when there is wind, then the boxes drop into the sea. Now we will step up publicity and ask them try not to do that. In fact, the fish market has increased the number of bins to collect the boxes. In fact, the boxes are very easily blown into the sea if they are put on the shore. Well, these are our measures. So much for now. Thank you.
Any other questions, Selina Wong? Foam plastic containers or bottles. Well, whether it's the fishermen or other people, if they don't put them in a fixed spot and these containers are blown to the sea, then should that happen? That is, the fishermen have not taken enough measures to prevent the boxes from being blown to the sea. Legally speaking, should someone take pictures and provide evidence, that would give you the ground for prosecution, right? Well, it's not. Well, but under the law, there is no penalty for that. For Section 4D of the relevant ordinance, it depends on when you only break the law when the tide is high. Well, if someone purposefully throws something into the sea, whether it's a cigarette butt or a plastic bottle, whether he threw it purposefully or not, he can't be sued. Well, under the current law, if they throw it right into the sea or throw it in the shorelines that cause the changes in the tides, that cause it to be blown to the sea, then that would be against the law. But if it's something that is an item that is blown to the sea by wind, then it's not against the law. So, Chairman, we have to see whether there's a loophole in the law then. If someone, just because of negligence, take no care of his properties and just let the properties be blown to the sea by wind, then he's not really actually paying attention. My understanding is that if you throw cigarette butts on the street, you'll be liable for a fine, fixed fine. We are talking about the relevant ordinance actually authorized by the Director of Food and Environmental Hygiene Department to actually charge the person who. So under the law, current law, if you purposefully throw something into the sea, that would be liable for prosecution. But if you do not purposefully throw something, then something to the sea, then that's not against the law. If you throw something into the sea and the high tide, for example, in shorelines, when the tide is high and the item is forced or blown to the sea, then that would be against the law. Well, we've been talking a lot about cigarette butts. My understanding is that if you throw cigarette butts to the ground, you're liable for a 1,500 fine. But that lies outside of the scope of law enforcement of the Marine Department. So for the foam plastic bottles used by fishermen, if they are put on the put on a boat, and what would be a liable offense? Well, the foam plastic bottles found in the sea, they are not thrown purposefully into the sea. They're just not properly placed on shore, and because of that, they are blown to the sea by the wind. So under the summary offense ordinance, actually they would be liable. That is, if you put something on the shore and whether something is blown to the sea, then there's no ordinance saying that because you have not put the bottles in a fixed position to prevent it from being fallen into the sea, then you would not be liable. So, Mr. Yik Chi-ming, I think we're talking about different things. If you see someone throwing a cigarette butt to the ground, then he's liable for 1,500 fine. Yeah, of course. If nobody sees it, of course you're not liable. But from what I heard from the department is that the current legislation does not cover foam plastic bottles being blown to the sea. We are trying to help the fishermen, people in the fishery industry, do a proper job in taking care of the boxes. Well, every month we will go to the fish market. You're trying to educate the fishermen and advise them not to, misplace the bottles, right? Yes. So, say at home, if your but window frames are not properly sealed, and if the aluminium window frames fall into the ground, then the household owner would be liable for offense. So if there are any illegal, unsafe structures that collapse, then the owners of the structures would be liable for prosecution. But right now, you said that you cannot enforce the law by way of the summary offense ordinance. So I can see that there is a loophole in the law. So can the administration look into the existing law and try to tighten up the legislation? Because you have the responsibility. You can tell people that they have the responsibility to make sure that their properties will not be blown to the sea, resulting in marine refuse. Ms. Chen? You've heard views from the members. Can you actually try to convey the ideas to your colleagues? Yes, I think the ordinance is not under our bureau, but we will pass the opinions to the relevant bureau for the consideration. Albert Chen? Of course. Justin Yik Chi-ming's proposal is good. I support it. That is, I feel that I think it's more appropriate to use the environmental hygiene ordinance or regulation to ensure that people would not misplace items and run the risk of getting the items blown to the sea or becoming refuse in the sea. But I think that's not enough alone as a remedy. Of course, the Marine Department has promised to step up publicity and education. I welcome that. But this issue in Hong Kong in the past 20, 30 years has been around. We've seen areas where improvement have been made, like compared to 20, 30 years ago, the pollution level in typhoon shelters has improved. Of course, the issue of foam plastic boxes still remain. Stringed or beefing up or actually try to tightening up law enforcement will be useful, or we can install more CCTVs so there can be more misbehaviors will be put on records. Back in the 1970s, there were Marine Department's management station actually along the shores to actually monitor the noise generated by, back in the 1990s, indeed, there were noise generated by some towboats. So on the whole, marine management, when it comes to marine management, Hong Kong is quite inferior compared to other countries. The NAMA report shows that maybe we have been too complacent in the past. There doesn't seem to be much incentive to try to modernize marine management in Hong Kong. But I do hope that the Marine Department colleagues there, I actually work on a ship. I was a sailor for several years myself. I changed careers later on. But you need to look at how to modernize marine management in Hong Kong. There are some international regulations that can be applied in Hong Kong. We're following some international standards. But whether it's because of complacency or antiquated systems, like I always said that the kind of vessels you use to clean, marine refuse in the harbor or in the outer sea, you're just getting a few vessels patrolling the Victoria Harbour is not enough. You can have a few vessels patrolling the harbour as a show to tourists, but your main team responsible for cleaning up the scene, has to do a better job. I don't even see any, cleanup vessels doing the harbour or the sea refuse cleanup work south of Lantau. I've never seen any cleanup vessels operating off South Lantau. Sometimes I go hiking in the area weekends, but I've never seen, sea clearing vessels operating there. I complained to the LCSD some years ago about the, presence of refuse on beaches. When the wind blows from the southeast, you don't really want to dip into the water. Sometimes you may have lunch there, but then when the wind blows from the southeast, when you see the refuse, you wonder whether this is what you should expect to see in a place like Hong Kong. And LCSD and the lifeguards there at the beaches, LCSD lifeguards at the beach say, well, it's not their responsibility to clean up the refuse, so they call other government departments to come, and yet the whole beach is left, full of rubbish because we haven't seen the immediate deployment of staff to clean up the beach on the same day. So it's a matter of management. Sometimes, things have become so bureaucratic. And you're saying, well, maybe the Marine Department is not responsible for everything, but looking at the nice environment in Hong Kong, and yet it's littered. Everywhere is littered. Along the shorelines of Central, in other areas, Llama Island, South Lantau. I'm a resident in South Lantau, and I haven't seen this refuse problem. I'm very grateful for the presence of the deputations today who actually spoke what was, what was on my mind as well. They have given you actual cases and examples. Mrs. Jo Wilson, for 42 days, she and other people clean up the beach on a daily basis. So they found new refuse every day on Lam Island. That's ridiculous. And so it's something that makes us feel that government departments have not done enough in improving the situation. Well, it's lucky now that we have a group of very proactive residents who haven't given up on cleaning up the beach. But we need to think about this issue. I'd like to thank the regional groups for the hard work done over the years. I mean, without the leadership, I would not have detected some issues. They prepare for us a lot of information. So I hope that at a time when the regulation is passed, I'm sure when the bill is up for the third and second meeting, we will speak in the main sitting. But we do want to see more coordination among government departments. I certainly understand that it's not the Marine Department or Commerce and Economic Development Bureau alone that can tackle the issue. But on the whole, I think the various departments concerned should think about how they can work together better. Yes, I think you all know that the regulation involved this time was relatively simple, and it is not directly related to cleanup actions or campaigns, but whether it's land-based or marine-based refuse, we are concerned, about pollution that is caused by them. And now we have several deputations with us, and I hope that today's meeting is not just for members to just say what's on your mind. I do hope that after this meeting, we can take some follow-up actions. For example, the few organizations have got actual experience in cleaning up the refuse. So from now on, which departments can they work more closely with? Like WWF told us that they've carried out research and they saw people throwing rubbish. And, for example, they cited some black spots. So in the future, which government department like WWF can contact once they have noticed a location that is on the verge of becoming a black spot, which government departments can they report cases to? I know if you just pick up refuse left by boats, the sea is so big, it's just impossible. You can't have CCTV everywhere in the sea. But ultimately, there must be some concrete actions that we can do together through collaborations and try to improve the situation. So I do hope that a closer collaboration among various parties could be what we can achieve through today's meeting. So any officials would like to respond to what I just said? Mr. Lee? Thank you, Chairman. The Environmental Protection Department, we do pay attention to tackling marine refuse. Therefore, in 2012, November, we set up an interdepartmental working group. And the working group is intended to try to help government departments collaborate together more effectively. The Marine Department, apart from enforcing the relevant laws and stopping vessels or individuals from throwing rubbish into the sea,
and also clearing floating refuse, there are three other government departments, including the AVHD, which is responsible for clearing refuse along the shores. And of course, they are responsible for cleaning refuse in the streets. The LCSD is responsible for the refuse on gazetted beaches, including floating refuse in the waters of the gazetted beaches. And the other department is the AFCD, which is responsible for looking after or clearing the refuse in the marine parks. The four departments work together in this interdepartmental working group. We have done a 15-month survey, and a report was published last month. And we have provided a copy of the report to members. Next month, the Environment Affairs panel will discuss the report. Today, I would like to highlight the recommendations of this report. First of all, we need to find out the source of refuse. Now there is there is an international beach cleaning organization. They have a report card, and through this data card, we categorize the refuse, and then we try to identify the sources of such refuse, whether they come from the sea or from the land. They are dumped by humans. Whether we say 80% of the refuse is land-based or 70% is land-based, this can only be a reference. The most important thing is all these refuse are caused by humans. Through the classification, we are able to identify activities that are easy in creating refuse. And we also try to identify places along the shoreline where refuse tend to accumulate. Some places are prone to prevailing winds, and the accumulation of refuse becomes serious. Currents are also another factor. And through the study, we have identified 27 spots which are more prone to collect or accumulate refuse. And we work with the departments concerned and try to consider various factors and adjust the refuse collection arrangements. Some places may require several cleanups in a month, and some places can just be or can have a cleanup once every 2 months, depending on where they are. Mr. Lee, concerning your report, I think members have read your report. Paper is CB 4104-1415-01. The groups, the deputations can also go to our website to get this report. The Environment Affairs panel next month will hold a meeting to discuss this paper. Seen a hand, Mr. Frankie Yick and then Mr. Albert Chan. 5 minutes each. Well, 5 minutes are adequate. Thank you, Mr. Lee. I've read your report. You don't need to explain. I think the last part is most important. I hope that at the next meeting of the Environmental Affairs panel, you don't need to repeat your report. Now you have such discoveries. How your departments work to deal with that. Say, Albert mentioned Lantau South. Now, according to your report, during the typhoon, during the rainy season, the refuse accumulate. But Albert has never seen a Marine Department boat collecting refuse over there. Now, you have identified the problem. Next time when you come to the environmental panel meeting, you better tell us. You have already made an arrangement with the Marine Department. Say, during the rainy season, you will clean up the beaches along South Lantau how many times per month, instead of repeating your report. Now, the sea is so big, it's hard for us to clean it up. Is it Mr. Long? Mr. Chang? Yes, Mr. Chang. Now you say, Aberdeen Typhoon Shelter is the black spot. Now the taxi drivers and public light buses have the photo cameras. You have the speed cameras all over Hong Kong. So if you know where a black spot is, just put up a CCTV system, just to remind them that you better watch out. I can catch you. It's not difficult. The most important thing is to identify the black spot and then do something about it. It must be useful. I hope you will consider this. Ms. Albert Chan. Well, I don't want to argue with the EPD. I don't want to argue over the report. I really find the report very poor, and the assessment of refuse is very bad. And I don't agree with the conclusion. 90% of refuse in South Lantau came from the sea. You know the fairways. I see sandals, slippers. I see gloves, syringes. I really can't see how can syringes flow from the land and then dumped from a land source and then float to Cheongsha or Puyo. I want to argue with you here. I'm a member of the EA panel, and I will take up the point. I don't argue with you on the reason or cause. It's meaningless. I want results. Individual departments, how much resources do they have to clean up floating refuse, to clean up the beaches? You say LCSD. I told you that 1 or 2 months ago I saw refuse. I know the LCSD. I know how they arrange the work. The lifeguards will not pick up refuse. They will call the contractors. How are you going to improve the mechanism? 9 a.m. in the morning, a lifeguard saw that the whole beach is covered with refuse. And how soon will the LCSD clean up the beach? 3 months ago, I walked along a big wave bay in Lantau. It was covered with refuse. 30 years ago, I saw sea tortoise laying eggs. Now we have no more sea tortoises or sea turtles. Because of these problems, many species are leaving us. They have disappeared. Setting up an interdepartmental working group is good. It's a good start. But how can you effectively set up a system to make sure that the departments discharge their duties? We don't want the green groups to clean refuse once every 3 months. I work with them in Chimawan. Mrs. Jo Wilson, they cleaned up the beaches in Lama. In Lapsabwan, they clean up the beaches. The green groups put in a lot of efforts. We really appreciate them. But your departments have to do your work. You receive wages to do your job. The green groups are just doing it voluntarily. I really don't want to discuss it again after 10 years, and we are still on the same problem. Don't you feel shameful about it? You are government officials. Well, I'm fed up with it. Yes, let me follow up the point I raised earlier. I think the executive departments should work with the green groups. And Mr. Lee seems to be very courageous, and he wanted to take the opportunity to introduce his report. I will discuss your report at the next meeting. Now, I think maybe you can have hotlines. Your hotlines can, or you can have contact numbers to be given to the green groups. In fact, we do have a channel with the green groups, say, with Jo Wilson. They have direct emails to us. There is communication channel between us and the green groups, and rely on them to provide us with information, because we are unable to get our staff on every beach. We have already got very good communication channels. Now, after they've reported to your departments, then you need to have adequate manpower to respond. My assessment is that you don't have enough manpower to deal with the problem. Now, when they report on refuse, the number of reports have increased. And we cannot rely on our own staff to do the patrolling all the time. We rely on the reports by the citizens, and they are very active in doing that, and we thank them. And after they have reported to us, then we respond within a short period of time. As for the information given to us by the green group, it's not just that they ask us to pick up the refuse. They have provided us with information so that we can do analysis. Say, for example, some refuse bags have refuse which seem to be refuse coming from ship repair or vessel repair, and then we'll have to conduct an investigation. Well, if it is a report on refuse, we can respond very quickly. Say, if in the harbors, in the harbor, in the typhoon shelter, we can respond within 1 or 2 hours. In fact, the information they've given us is not just limited to that. Well, yes, I would also like to thank another group, the Eco Marine. Although they have not sent anybody to come along, we'd like to thank them. Now, in fact, we have nothing more to do with regard to the regulation because the deadline for amendment, in fact, we completed clause-by-clause study on the 27th of April, and on the 23rd of May, we were unable to extend the scrutiny of the regulation. Therefore, the regulation has already come into effect, and our report will be given to the House Committee. We have no chance to debate this at the LegCo meeting. No time. You have missed that. You have missed that deadline. Now, when there is a provision. You mean the budget? You mean the budget? The salary for the Secretary for Environment. That may be a reason for cutting his pay. All right, may I thank the deputations and also the officials for attending our meeting. That's the end of the subcommittee. Thank you.